close that one. Okay, why don't we go ahead and get going? It's a little after 4, and I think we've got pretty critical mass here. So thanks to everybody for showing up. You're on the Zoom meeting of the Montgomery Park to Hollywood Transit and Land Use Development Strategy or Study meeting. I'm Barry Manning with BPS for anybody that might be joining as a guest. And this group is the group that is acting as a sounding board and communication conduit to organizations for the Northwest portion of the study. We've met twice before. This is our 3rd meeting. So why don't we go ahead and do introductions? And I'm just going to do it like I did last time, or I've been doing it. I'm just going to call your name in the alphabetical order from the list. You can just say hi and remind folks of who you're with, and then we'll jump into the agenda. So I got Brian Ames up first. Brian with us today?
Hey, good afternoon.
Okay.
I'm on my phone for a few minutes while my computer restarts. So I might drop off, but I'll be back on.
Okay.
Brian Ames, I'm representing the group 1535 that owns the formerly ESCO site.
Great. Stephanie, I have you up next.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Basiliga, and I am with MISO, which is Micro Enterprise Services of Oregon, and we were the community business organization that talked to some of the businesses for the Northeast section of this project.
And Raymond, I have you up next.
Hi, how y'all doing? I'm a member of Friends of Portland Streetcar. Used to be on the Streetcar Advisory Committee until that was disbanded.
Thanks for being here. Reza, you're up next.
Hello, Reza Farhudi. I am here on behalf of the Pearl District Neighborhood Association.
Thanks. Craig, are you here? Yeah, I see Craig. Craig? Whoop, you're muted still. Sorry, I can maybe, if you can unmute yourself, that'd be good.
Oh, sorry about that.
There you go.
Greg Hamilton, representing Northwest Industrial Business Association.
Great. Thanks. Dalton?
I am Dalton Human, and I live in the industrial area and one of the few holdout houses here.
Great. And Cachet, you want to introduce yourself again real quick?
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Cachet Kilson Anderson, and I am representing the Urban League of Portland and the Hollywood Senior Center.
Great. Thanks for being here. Jen.
Hi there, I'm Jen Macias. I live and work in Northwest Portland. I own a business in Northwest Portland, formerly of the NWDA Board and Planning Committee, as well as Communications. And I'm here representing other fellow women-owned businesses who are also part of the BIPOC community here in Northwest.
Thanks for being here. Greg, I saw you earlier. Yes? Yeah.
Yeah, this is Greg Madden with the Northwest Industrial Business Association, and also a business owner and building owner in the streetcar area.
Yeah.
Joy.
I'm Joy Pearson, and I live and work in the Northwest here in Portland. And also I'm representing Friendly House, a community center here on 27th and Thurman.
Thank you. Steve, I saw you online. Steve Pinger, yeah.
I'm here somewhere. Steve Pinger, Northwest District Association and property owner.
Stephen Ramos is next on my list. He's already called me and said he won't be able to make it today, so we'll have to catch him up on stuff. Next on the list is Phil.
Hello, and Phil Sellinger, and I'm serving on the NWDA Transportation Committee, former chair of that committee.
Great. Mike, you were here. I saw you earlier.
Hello, Mike Stonebreaker. I am a property owner in Northwest. I'm on the NWDA board and transportation committee, and also the liaison on the planning committee.
Great. Jordan, I've got you on the list next.
Hi, I'm Jordan Winkler. I'm a resident in Northwest, and I'm with the ownership of about a 5-acre industrial parcel in 20th and Wilson.
And Alex, or Alexandra, sorry.
Hi everyone, I'm Alex Zimmerman. I live in the neighborhood. I sit on the NWDA Transportation Committee, and I'm here on this group on behalf of the Portland Streetcar Board of Directors.
So I didn't introduce all the staff. So again, I'm Barry. Why don't we, I'm just going to introduce you in order that you're on my screen. So Kate, you're up first.
Hi, Kate Drennan. I'm with the Area Project and Planning Group at PBOT.
And Mike?
Hey everyone, Mike Saratella. I'm with PBOT, I'm a transportation planner.
And Dan, we have you on.
Hey everyone, I'm Dan, Director of Portland Streetcar Inc.
Let's see, and then we have a couple of folks from our consulting team. Julia?
Hello everyone, I'm Julia Reed with Nelson Nygaard. We're supporting PBOT and BPS on the planning process.
And Tyler?
Hi everybody, my name is Tyler Bump. I'm a director at Echo Northwest, and we are leading the land use scenarios analysis part of this work.
Great. So I think I've got everybody that's on the committee or on the consultant or planning team. So thank you all for being here today. And I know I've got some guests here, so we'll have an opportunity for public comment at a couple of points in the meeting if you have any. So I just want to let you know that.
Barry, you, I think you missed Joanna.
Did I miss somebody?
Joanna.
Oh, I'm sorry. Joanna, yes. Thank you.
No worries. This is Joanna Fugaitas. I'm representing Prosper Portland. Barry, did you introduce Molly as well?
I have not introduced you, Molly, yet, so why don't you go ahead and do it, Molly?
Sure. Hi, I'm Molly. I'm with CCA, Columbia Corridor Association, but we're working closely with the Northwest Industrial Business Association right now to work on getting some feedback about the potential for the streetcar.
Great. And I know since we're all doing introductions to Steve Allen, you're with us today. You want to introduce yourself as well?
Alan Clausen, Northwest Examiner newspaper.
Great. I think I've got everybody. Thanks for catching folks that I didn't see on the screen. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in because we've got a pretty full agenda, and I want to make sure that we get to hear from working group members and other folks as we go through this. So just to overview the agenda, I know you've all seen this. I've got a few housekeeping items I want to go over, including a couple of project schedule changes that I want to talk about. And then the first part of the agenda would be Kate's going to walk us through the survey results from the online open houses that we had open through August 9th, and just let you know what we've heard so far from that. And answer any questions you might have about that, and maybe just give a little bit of information about the info sessions that we had back in July. Then Tyler Bump from Eco Northwest and the consultant team is going to update us on some preliminary jobs, housing, and valuation numbers. These are kind of critical elements for some of the process to come to some conclusion about a preferred scenario for the area. And I know a lot of folks have asked about that, so we're going to get some preliminary information on that. And then the last 40 minutes or so, what I wanted to do is just go around the room, so to speak, and just get a sense of what your thoughts were about the scenarios, what additional information would be important for you to understand, so that if we can bring some of that back at the next meeting, we can do some of that. And then just see if you had any preliminary, if you wanted to weigh in preliminarily on which direction you think makes sense. And if you don't have that direction right now, perfectly fine to say, I'm not ready to say what I think about that, but we would like to hear what issues you might have or concerns or information needs you might have about them. So that work for everybody? I'll just go with a nod if that works for everybody. Okay. And then we're going to monitor, Mike's going to monitor the chat. So if you've got questions, we could throw them in there, but I'll also try to do that, either wave your hand or we can do the hand raise thing on the side, and I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. Just in terms of housekeeping, we sent out project meeting notes, seems like forever ago, Did everybody get a chance to look at those, and did anybody have any comments or additions or corrections to those that they want to note in them? I haven't seen anything come my way. So I'm guessing I'm not seeing anybody jumping up, so I'm going to assume that's a no. So one of the things that I did want to, moving on to project updates, a couple of different things. One is we did make a change, and reason Columbia Corridor and Molly is here is that between the last meeting we had and this meeting, as you all know, we're working with community-based organizations to do some additional targeted outreach to underserved groups. NEBA had applied for a grant to do some outreach to industrial employees and firms in the study area Northwest. And we're continuing to work hard to try to get a grant agreement together and get all the I's dotted and T's crossed, but we got to a few situations where it just looked like a change in fiscal sponsorship probably made a lot of sense. So NEBA had intended to work with Columbia Corridor on their grant anyhow in terms of technical capacity and whatnot. So what ended up happening is we switched the grant from NEBA to Columbia Corridor Association, administering the grant and working with and on behalf of NEBA. So that's been a change. So when we hear a report out from the CBOs, we'll hear, I don't know if Craig and Molly, if you guys have worked out who's going to report out, or Greg, but it'll be one of the, or a couple of the three of them, because they're working together on this thing. So I just wanted to let you know that Friendly House is still working on the west side, and MISO and Hollywood Senior Center and Urban League on the east side. So that's that. The other thing that I wanted to mention was we are internally, we looked at our schedule and how ambitious it was in terms of trying to come to some conclusions about the direction on the project, and we felt that we probably needed to provide some more time for that decision making and kind of analysis and whatnot. So we are proposing to extend at least this early fall, late summer part of the project by a meeting. So let me see if I can bring this up and just share my screen. I sent this all out, and I don't know if folks were able to see what I sent out earlier today, and I apologize for not getting that out to you sooner, but all seems to be coming on the fly. But I sent out a new project schedule, which I'm showing to you right now. Can you see that okay, Tyler, Molly? Are you seeing that? You're the folks that I'm seeing on my screen. You're seeing that? Okay. So what we're proposing to do is add a meeting in October and actually shift the agenda that we had planned for the September meeting to October. So that would really be more like, where do we think we're going to land on maybe a preferred scenario? And in the September meeting, we're proposing to shift that meeting 1 week out, since the meeting would have fallen on the 9th of September, which is like a day after Labor Day. I don't know that you all have vacation plans or anything like that, but it seemed like a short week and maybe better to shift it out a week. But use that meeting to continue review of community feedback and some more technical analysis that we're working on right now. So it would be supplementing the economic work that you're going to hear about today, and hopefully being able to bring some more findings in terms of at least initial transportation information or enhanced economic information to the group. So that's kind of what we're proposing there. And then the byproduct of that is it does shift all of our other planned meetings and milestones out by about a month. So we would not meet in December as we had planned last time. That meeting would shift to January. And then we would meet again potentially in March for a proposed plan. And this shows that the other public review items, like the discussion draft of any proposed zoning or proposal, would shift out to, and I'm pointing at it here, a November timeframe, and that the final proposed draft that would ultimately go to Planning and Sustainability Commission, should we get to a proposed draft with zoning changes and things like that, would get pushed out till springtime, probably in April, and then the legislative process would follow on to that, following on later in the year. So Any questions about that? Does that work for folks to provide a little bit more time in this early process to chat with you? And I would say we might have even further changes, but let's see what kind of information we can bring to you all in September and see where we go with that. Any questions about that? I'm not seeing anybody waving their hand or raising their hand. That works for everybody. And the third week of September.
Terry, Phil has a
It
question.
looks like
Okay.
Phil, yeah.
Sure.
Just a quick question. Could you just let us know where the technical pieces will feed into that schedule? You're going to get all that covered by October?
Yeah, there's some of it's going to evolve. A lot of, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, I think, as Tyler's presenting some of the information. We're trying to pull together some preliminary kind of technical information on economics, and we're exploring whether we can do some transportation analysis in this early phase to help inform kind of the conversation about the scenarios. The way the transportation planning pieces of it and modeling were scoped originally, and I probably should let Kate talk to this, but we're really centered on modeling and analysis of a pursued concept. We're looking to see if we can do some more preliminary work to help inform that, but it would be at a higher level, not a full detailed transportation model. We plan to do that on a preferred scenario, but we want to gather some more information. But we're hoping to pull a lot of that together over the next month and share some of that with you in September so that when we get to October, we have a better idea of where we're at. Kate, do you want to add anything to that? Is that your understanding of where we're at with the transportation? We're still waiting on some data. Right?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think in September it would be if we can do an initial secondary model, and then also sharing some of the work we've been doing with the transit alternatives and how that links up to the different land use scenarios. We could share that in September, and some other initial work, but the larger scope of the transportation planning of the district and like very specific intersection modeling analysis would still happen later in the winter once we have a preferred scenario. So that wouldn't be in September. That would be for those later sort of second phase meetings.
Thank you.
Yeah. So that's kind of where we're at now. And we want to, again, since this group is a information conduit to your organizations, but we're also looking for your feedback and your reflection of what community issues are. We're trying to share information with you as we go and as we learn it. And some of the stuff you're going to see today is fairly hot off the press. So you're getting information as we're learning about it as well. So I'm going to assume that we're okay with that September meeting, and let me know if there's any concerns or if for some reason you can't make that. And I guess the rest of the agenda is plenty of time to plan for. I did want to give you, I also want to mention while we're doing this, I know some of you have logged onto it because I've been monitoring some of it. We did put up a Slack account, finally got that accomplished. So I'm happy to see that people are using that and sharing information on it. So I'm monitoring it occasionally, but not consistently. But if you are on Slack and you have questions of staff and you want to engage staff in a question, I think the best way to do that is just email us directly so that we know that there's a conversation going on that we either need to monitor or engage in or provide information for. But I will assume that you guys are sharing information on that and having your conversations there. And we'll jump in if there's something that we see that makes some sense to jump in on. And otherwise, we'll leave that as a forum, as you guys requested, to exchange information and share feedback and resources and whatnot. And if you haven't jumped on or logged into it yet, I sent out a couple of links to folks that hadn't jumped on yet. If you are not on it and want to get on it, just shoot me a reminder, or I'll double check and I'll send out one more reminder. But if you missed that, let me know if you want to get on it and I can make sure that you get it. Any comments on that before we move on? Okay, so I want to go to the CBOs and just ask the 4 CBOs that are with us today to just a quick update on their outreach efforts. So I'm just going to go in the order that I have on the agenda, and the first one up there would be Friendly House. So Joy, can you give us a few words on where you guys are at with your process?
Hello. Friendly House is kind of in the process right now of taking the contacts that we've made through the survey talking to people one-on-one. I've been taking some time to call people every day and talk through some of the information with them because it's a little bit overwhelming. Because everybody who filled out the survey, you know, also got all the information. So I'm trying to kind of close that gap with people between hypotheticals and then the consequences, you know, of some of those choices. And it's going as well as it can during a pandemic right now, I think. And so we're clicking right along. I'm happy that we have the extended timeline. I think that's going to be helpful just in digesting some of this information and being able to help other people do it as well. So we just got the translation done for Mandarin. So I'm really excited for some of this information to get into the Mandarin speaking community in Northwest Portland, which I'm sure some of you know is a very rich and wonderful community. And I am really looking forward to some of the opinions that are going to come from that. So I'm really excited about how that's going.
And you've contacted, my understanding based on our conversation, over 100 folks already and talked to about 100 folks on, yeah. So
yeah.
That really is helping to extend the outreach for us quite a bit.
Yeah, it is challenging to try and, I just want to make sure that I'm not just like having people like tick boxes, but that people are engaged and understand, you know, the depth and breadth of this. And I know that that's probably the challenge that everybody is feeling, you know, because it is complex and there's a lot, but I think we're getting a lot of really great information from people in the community about their wants and their needs and their fears. And so it's almost two different things. Like I want to hear what people want and I want to like engage them in that conversation. But I also think that sometimes you think you know what you want, but some of these, like some of the consequences are different than what you'd expect. Like I think that's kind of been the challenge that I keep running into. And I've learned a lot. And I think that people in the community have had a lot of really good things to say. So I'm excited to share some of that with you guys.
Great. We're going to get reports from these CBOs, by the way, for everybody on the committee. I think we're targeting kind of mid-September to have kind of interim reports on these. So that's, hopefully we could share at least some of that with you next time we meet, or at least be on the cusp of that. Next I have on my list, Columbia Corridor and NEBA, which we're just getting underway. So I don't know if Molly or Craig or Greg want to just kind of give an update on where we're at with that, or?
You know, this is Greg. Yeah, I can start out, but yeah, definitely Molly, if you have any feedback, Molly's been doing a great job of helping us with getting our surveys together, and also our contacts lists have been merged. So yeah, so at this point, like Joy was saying, it's you know, with the COVID times and whatnot, we're trying to do as much as we can with the survey online. So what we've done is we've utilized the PWG equity report as a goal of, you know, there, as you hopefully most of you have read, I think it's a good report. It asks a lot of questions that they say, you know, as far as outreach for the community in that area should verify some of these numbers and figures. So we've turned our surveys questions towards answering some of those to continue that support of that report. So we have done that, and it's a kind of a daunting task to be involved as a nonprofit and developing this survey by supporting, you know, basically how do we do this outreach when we're talking about building owners, business owners that own or rent their building, and also the employees. But so we've basically formed four separate surveys so that the questions are relevant to those responding to it. And we've also made some headway on updating the list and getting our contact list extended. We're going to continue that as we do our outreach with the surveys. And we've also did a preliminary website page for the survey that has some of the streetcar content that Barry, you furnished and the city of Portland's furnished to explain what the what the issue is and the options that are currently out there. And then the next step is to have them directed to the survey based on their involvement in the city, whether they're or in the Northwest area, whether they're a business owner, a building owner, or both, or an employee. So that's what we have so far. We've done some preliminary interviews using those as tests for the surveys to fine tune the surveys. We have had Molly's completed some of the updates to the surveys that we've resolved. So we're pretty close at this point to move forward with doing the outreach with the surveys. And I think we've also reached out to some folks at Prosper Portland and others that saying, hey, are we on the right track with the survey, so that we can make sure that we get some feedback from the city as far as what we're looking at for getting the right information and getting the right questions out to the right people. So I don't, Molly, if you have anything to add, or Craig.
I think that's a pretty good overview of what we've been doing so far. Like basically we just wanted to make sure that we are representing all of the interests in the area, as well as what the city is trying to do and interested in seeing as far as the feedback. So our last big step was to make sure that we had our survey that we've been working on with Northwest Industrial and with Working Waterfront Coalition and CCA, and run it by the city planning office so they can put their input as well. So we have, hopefully we're targeting the people that we're trying to hear from, and hopefully we're representing all of the various perspectives of this project to within the one survey that we have catered to these various groups, the business owners, the people that are property owners, those that are owner operators, and the employees. I think the biggest thing that we were looking at recently was how to target specifically the employees, because they're the hardest group to reach. For us right now, we have a lot of the contact information for the business owners and property owners, but as far as asking employees themselves, which is a group of that often gets overlooked, that is of great interest. We really want to hear from them. So that's been a big piece of what we were working on today. And Joanna was helping us work on that today, and Barry as well, how to reach the employees. But once we have that wrapped up, I mean, we have plans in place, we have our contact list in place, and everything is about ready to launch. We should have, hopefully, our feedback starting to come in at the end of this month and then into September for the extended timeline. So that's about it.
Yeah, our contact list in the immediate area has been a little bit sparse, just because most of that now is, you know, the property owners that bought the ESCO property, but we do have some recent updates I'll send to Molly with some contacts there. I think they're kind of the most relevant, since their businesses will probably be staying in the area after the streetcar's in, and what kind of effect that would have on their business and their operations. Yeah, other than that, it's a challenge. It's hard to, you know, explain to the folks in our industrial area what this effect is going to have on any kind of zoning change and things like that. There's give and take, and we want to be fair in our questioning, but we also want to make sure that we get some thoughtful answers in the surveys.
Great. So I'm going to go ahead and go over to Stephanie for a quick MISO recap and update, and then we'll go to Cachet and we'll go on to the next items.
All right, so we held our first feedback. So we were focused on mainly small businesses, minority and women owned, a lot of micro entrepreneurs. We actually ended up with about 30 or 40% that were storefront based, and the rest were home based businesses. A little over 50% Black and African American owned, 22% white, about 18% Hispanics and Latinx, 5% Asian, and 5% that chose not to identify. About 55% were women-owned businesses. And we held our first session in May, and we did online sessions, feedback sessions, sent out the information ahead of time. and had a really great response for the first session and a not so great participation rate for the second session, which was in the middle of June, which was understandable because a lot of those small businesses were then gearing up to get ready to open. And so now that, you know, a lot of the businesses are open and trying to figure out how they're going to survive under this new normal and are in the business of trying to pivot, we're having a really hard time getting them to think about anything else. So we have about 30 respondents, which is less than we had hoped that we had. But the one thing that we're seeing as I'm going through our survey data is very consistent information. They clearly favored one of the routes, the Sandy route. And a lot of the concerns that they had really focused on, you know, increased rents, gentrification, people getting displaced and that sort of thing. If a streetcar line comes in anywhere in the Hollywood area, and then there's development along the line. We did hear a couple of really interesting things that actually Barry and Joanna and I have talked about. One of those was that we had several businesses on the northeast side that are really interested in what's happening in the northwest, the Montgomery Park area. But they said they're interested in it and they would really like to move into that area, but they're not sure really what's there for them. So it's something where I think Barry has said that he and his team are going to kind of stay in touch throughout the rest of this project so that they can kind of provide that feedback to them. And the other thing that we heard was, this was during our second session, and so in June there was a lot going on. And we had a couple of property owners, they own a couple pieces of property, who felt that they had really been had run into a lot of roadblocks trying to develop. And I'm not going to say there's a lot of anger, but there's a lot of frustration that we were hearing from some of the small business owners who also own property, and even just the business owners in general, feeling that a lot of developers from outside have been able to come in and get projects developed easily. And I know nothing is easy, but and they really feel that that's something that the city needs to address in both of these areas going forward, is making sure that you're opening up development and ownership opportunities for people of color, women-owned businesses. It's something that I think that, you know, they say a lot of the developers will come in and they say we want to do this for the neighborhood, when what really needs to be done is the investment in the people who are already there and giving those people some ownership in the communities. That was very eye-opening for me. And Barry and Joanne and I have actually been talked about, you know, if there are some ways that some of the developers can come in and find a way to work with some of these business owners, you know, who also own property, and even, you know, figuring out how to get them just kind of tuned into what the city does and what the requirements are, and, you know, what it really takes to develop properties. So.
That was enlightening. Thanks, Stephanie. So we're hoping that some of that can be integrated, some of that, what we learned in the Northeast, can still be integrated into the Northwest side too, because it touched on that. Kashay, do you want to give a quick update on what Hollywood Senior Center and Urban League are up to?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So the Urban League of Portland and the Hollywood Senior Center were getting there, but where we kind of jumped up a little slow on the uptake there. We have been giving out surveys as well as setting up an online survey via the Hollywood Senior Center's, I believe, their website. And as it stands right now, I believe we've reached out to about 60 respondents so far. Definitely not to the goal that we have set for ourselves, but we're going to be passing out more surveys and getting more information from our seniors and communities of color in regards to the project. One of the things that we've decided to implement is to have our Urban League case managers call up their clients and kind of not only just go through the surveys, but also speak with the clients about some of the things that they're concerned about that may not necessarily be touched down upon the surveys. And we have learned quite a few things. I think the most glaring concern is that a lot of people are worried about displacement when the project gets set up. One rent increase, and what's going to happen to the people who are at this point in time homeless and or houseless, and how that's going to impact them, where they're going to go, what services might be provided to them, just to kind of, you know, not them feel like they're being pushed out of someplace all once again. So that's kind of been the biggest concern. Of course, because we're dealing with a lot of communities of color and seniors, they don't necessarily move around too much. So the idea of being able to go from the Hollywood area into the Northwest area, where a lot of our seniors don't necessarily go to on a regular basis, it's somewhat appealing to them. So there's a little bit of excitement, but also combine that with the apprehension about being displaced. So I think that I think for me personally, and I feel that some of our staff members feel the same way, I think it's better for us to do the surveys via the phone. And we've also gone to a couple of senior residence areas just to kind of, you know, get an idea of how people are really feeling about it. Of course, we make sure to take the social distancing measures required in order to do that. And it's interesting to see, you know, how different people feel about different aspects. I don't think there has been a uniform agreement upon what path should be taken for the expansion. So some agree with Broadway, some like the Sandy, a few of them like the Sandy Irving Street prospect. So yeah, it's been interesting. So we're going to really gear things up in the next couple of days. I have a pretty long list of clients that I'm going to be contacting just to get their surveys filled out and get their opinions upon what should happen.
Okay. Thanks, Kishay. Sounds like we're making some progress on that. So that was a little bit longer than I anticipated, but an update.
Sorry.
No, that's not from you. I just saying the whole items. I underestimated how much time we needed for all of it. I do want to make sure we get on to the next topic, but before we do that, I just want to see if there's any PWG members that have items that aren't on the agenda that you want to bring up that we can at least address or put on the table for this meeting or the next meeting before we move on the agenda. Anybody have anything they want to raise at this point in time? Okay. And then I also want to provide an opportunity for public comment. Is there anybody that wants, from the public, that wants to comment at this point in time? Okay. Having nothing going on there, I'm not seeing anything. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Kate, and we'll see if we can work through this next bit. Kate, do you want me to host that presentation?
Yeah, that's fine. So while Barry gets that loaded up, I'm going to give you a very brief overview of our survey findings so far. The survey was open for probably like 6 weeks maybe, and we had it linked off our website. We had 2 info session kind of open house Zoom calls that many of you attended, and linked to the survey during that. And we're hoping people will kind of take it on the tail end of those info sessions. We also have the website that kind of walked you through the same scenarios and linked to the survey. So we, I also, just before I get into this, because Stephanie's still on my screen and I see her, I just want to say that those info sessions you guys hosted were really wonderful and elucidating for me as well. And so it was great to hear this perspective of a lot of those business owners. So that was really great as well. And hopefully those folks are taking the survey too. But I look forward to those reports. So just on our open house surveys that I'm reporting today, we had 69 responses for our Northwest survey and 121 responses for our Northeast survey. So quite a bit more interest on the Northeast side. That might be because of more neighborhoods, I'm not sure, but we had about twice as many. I just pulled the demographics for the Northwest side. So they were unlinked surveys for privacy reasons. And so we got a little less than 50% of folks shared their demographics. It was mostly white, mostly men, which is pretty typical of people engaging in planning projects. Pretty high income respondents, with a quarter of them being between $100,000 and $150,000 a year. We can send you the PowerPoint. I see that popped up. I should say right now that we're gonna send you the full survey data in full with all of the responses for every question, as well as the full open-ended comments. So you're gonna see every piece of the information. We have that ready for you. It sounds like we're gonna send it tomorrow, I think. Barry said.
Tomorrow or Friday, hopefully, yeah.
Okay, so the next day or two. So you'll have all of this broken down and all of the same information we have. So that's one reason I can kind of go through it today, because you're gonna get all of it very soon. So let's just move forward. So we presented each scenario with a bunch of maps that I totally understand are extremely wonky. It's hard to talk about this to people that aren't well-versed in this language and kind of understand planning, and that is always a challenge. We did try to use sort of some plain language, but I saw the comments and I saw the Slack about missing the mark on this, so just want to acknowledge that. So for the enhanced industrial, breaking out kind of the responses, I would say that on do you agree with this approach, we had a pretty even split with slightly more people disagreeing. But once you introduce the idea of allowing a creative or industrial office uses, so something that had a little more flexibility, you started to see more support for this scenario, with a 61% agree over the 35%. So we kind of saw, well, there were some folks that were very strongly against any sort of change in the industrial district. As there was more flexibility applied, you saw stronger support for that. Barry, can you flip next one? In terms of a transit investment, there's about 41% agree, 40% disagree. So it's a pretty big split, and that doesn't surprise me. You know, in a lot of the comments, people didn't think that a streetcar in particular or a transit investment made sense in this scenario. In terms of the breaking up ESCO, again, it was a pretty even split on whether that was a good idea under this scenario. As we kind of moved to more dense scenarios and more mixes of uses, you saw that more people became supportive of transit or of splitting the blocks, but this kind of makes intuitive sense, keeping larger blocks under enhanced industrial. In all three scenarios, we did see pretty strong support for active frontages near any transit investment, whether it's a streetcar or a bus, people thinking that it made sense to kind of put those places where people would want to go near the transit alignment. So you can flip through. So just some of the takeaways from the enhanced industrial section. Like I said, pretty evenly divided, slightly more disagreeing about the approach, more support when paired with expanded uses, and divided about the compatibility and breaking up the ESCO site. Keep going. Just kind of rushing through these because you guys are going to have all of them. The employment scenario, again, we had a pretty even split on agree, disagree, with slightly more agreeing. There's also the most people seem to kind of not really know how they felt about this one. When you talked about the transit investment, again, the transit investment seemed to make more sense to respondents under this scenario versus the last one. So you see that kind of go up some, although it's just above 50%. We can keep moving.
Okay.
In the employment, we started asking about building height. And I will note for this and the mixed use that in both cases, the less than 7 stories were the most popular. So people really didn't, most people didn't want to see super high density in terms of height, although the next strongest was always the 20+ stories. So it was like the most people wanted to see fewer than 7. And then the next most popular option was above 20 stories with that split. But for employment, more on the kind of lower end that we saw. There was pretty strong support about this idea of a bike ped-oriented street on Roosevelt. People just kind of generally across the survey seemed to like the idea of more access and safe facilities for pedestrians and bikes. And again, the active frontages near transit was well received amongst respondents. They supported that. You can click through. So yeah, so the takeaways again, more evenly divided. Yeah, more people thought trans investment was compatible, higher level of agreement than the industrial scenario. Preferences towards smaller buildings and strong support on the bike ped. You can keep going. And then the mixed use. So the mixed use here, we saw the highest level of agreement was 60%. This one was interesting in that the neither had the lowest. So people really like had an opinion about this. Either they liked it or they didn't. There were fewer people that were kind of on the fence, which was interesting. Here we did see a stronger compatibility with transit. You know, folks generally thought that that was a good idea. Again, fewer kind of neither, more people thought one way or the other, but a pretty strong spread on this one in terms of agree versus disagree for a transit compatibility. Land use, again, we had it's almost the exact same split as the employment. So I think people kind of, you know, have their opinions about building heights, and the different scenario maybe didn't impact that. It was about 40% less than 7 stories, you know, 24% more than 20, which was similar, I think, under employment, it was like 22. So again, kind of the two ends of the spectrum on this. Here, the idea of splitting ESCO was more, we saw more people agree that in a mixed use scenario, they thought smaller, more permeable site made sense. There was also a strong support for bicycle or pedestrian bridge over Highway 30. People were pretty excited about that, 72%. And then again, the support for active frontages near transit. I think this was our highest agreement level at 80%, just about 80%. So, I mean, and that makes sense. I think when people think of mixed use areas around town, they often have good transit service of some kind. So that was something that people thought made sense in terms of being near. Yeah, you can move forward. So we kind of already covered all of these takeaways, so you can keep going. So then we kind of got into comparisons, and the way these questions were trying to ask about some of the project goals that we set out at the beginning of some of the outcomes we wanted in terms of, you know, our comprehensive plan goals or climate action goals, and then we have goals related to economic prosperity. And so we asked about kind of which scenario do you think would most help make progress toward those goals. And so on the climate action plan for economic, human health, equity, resilience, we have mixed use performing the best by quite a margin. The economic prosperity through creation of jobs, small business, micro, there's mixed use still performs the best, but it's not as strong of a performer in that one. That one you see more of the enhanced industrial doing well, and many people thinking that that was a good venue for especially probably protecting existing economies. And so what's kind of interesting is that actually performs more strongly than the employment scenario, where you might expect people thinking that that would be a job creator. So that's an interesting finding as well in terms of the spread and kind of a stronger preference for enhanced industrial, and when thinking about those small businesses and micro enterprises. You can click through. And what do you think could improve access to affordable housing, jobs, nature, recreation? Mixed use performs the best here. I mean, that's not really surprising. That's the only zoning that allows housing. So, you know, if you're thinking about affordable housing, then yes, you would choose the mixed use because that's the one that allows you to build housing. The nature, jobs, and recreation, mixed use performed better, probably because of the plans, the more of the urban design that was more kind of walkable and created park and green spaces, I would imagine. But it is interesting that enhanced industrial and employment kind of fared equally well on that question as well. So there was kind of an equal feeling about the ability of those two scenarios to create those, and then kind of a stronger feeling that mixed use would create those. And then this last question about which has the most opportunity to advance equitable outcomes. Mixed use also performed the best by quite a margin, but the second best being enhanced industrial, again, kind of beat out employment in terms of a community benefits agreement and how we could advance those outcomes. So that was another interesting finding. And then I think there's one more. And then I thought this one was really interesting because it says, you know, which kind of best matches your preferred vision. And so we have, I think that's 56.9, so about 57% mixed use. So unsurprisingly, since it performed the best on some of those goals, it performed well here. But I think a big takeaway is the nearly 20% that said none of the above. And so that's kind of an interesting one for looking at the open-ended responses too, for people were given a chance to kind of say what they thought would be, you know, a good vision. And I would say just, I at first thought about pulling the comments into here, but since we're going to provide you all of the raw comments, and there were so many and a lot of them were really lengthy comments, I thought I'll just let you read them. But just in terms of sort of the takeaway of some of the open-ended comments, I would say that, you know, those who support leaving industrial zoning feel very strongly about it, feel that it must be preserved for good jobs. A lot of the comments felt the need for, you know, at the other end, a strong need for housing in the city and jobs, as well as the co-location of housing and jobs in a district, and that being important for an area close to the city center and for some of those goals. Other comments, there were quite a few comments that felt that the city needed to focus on other priorities entirely. You know, a lot of comments about homeless services, cleaning up parks, streets, housing and initiatives that aren't necessarily related to this planning or development, but kind of felt that, you know, city focus should be on those and not this. Another theme we kind of covered, but many didn't feel a streetcar would make sense in an industrial scenario, but there would support for improved walking or biking connections, even under those scenarios. And then some other comments wanting to know about the jobs mix for the scenarios. And I think those probably came a lot from our own members here, and that's some of the good information that Tyler is going to be sharing today, the breakout of what jobs are under which scenarios. So that will be good. And then, yeah, concern about traffic impacts in any case of whether we bring, new industrial jobs, or whether it's office jobs, or whether it's housing, just kind of a general feeling that Northwest is at capacity with its transportation, and that like adding more people or trips will break the system. So that's something we hear a lot in planning, and that's definitely throughout the comments as well. So that is my quick overview, keeping us back on our time agenda. I'm happy to take questions. And again, we're gonna provide you the full data set from the surveys. So you'll have that within the end of the week.
Hey, Kate, thank you. Looks like Barry started to answer Phil's question about outreach. So Barry wrote that we sent an email to about 300 people on interested parties list and advertised on Nextdoor and Facebook. And also our community-based organizations help get the word out about the survey. Is there anything else that we need to add about how we got the word out?
Let me clarify. I want to just double check if I can figure it out real quickly. How many people were on that list? I may have overestimated how many. I'll have to let me look during the next presentation, and I'll clarify, I'll confirm the number of folks that were on that list. But that interested parties list consisted of about, I think there's somewhere between 175 and 200 folks that are on our list specifically. And then we included all of the relevant neighborhood associations and district coalition offices, business associations that we had information for, and other folks that have been participated or typically on groups, plus folks that are on what we call it at BPS, our legislative list, which is folks that have signed up to be, that are interested in planning projects of which this is one. So that's the kind of coverage that we sent out to you. And of course, on each of those, we asked respondents, including neighborhood associations and PWG members, to spread the word if they had networks that they could share information with. So I honestly think that, you know, while we would hope to get thousands of maybe responses in a survey that's online for something like this, I think that the 69 responses we got probably was relatively good compared to an in-person open house or workshop that you might have. And that's not a bad showing for an open house or a workshop, which this was trying to replicate to some degree. And
yeah, and I would add that because there were a lot of open-ended comments, like we probably have a lot more data on record or opinions on record than maybe we would have in an open house where people are talking to us and we can kind of take down notes. But this, like we have, I mean, you'll see there's a breadth of comments and a lot of really good thoughts in there. So yeah, Phil.
I have a question, yeah.
If I could just do a quick follow-up, Barry, this is Phil.
Sure.
I was disappointed with my own organization's effort at outreach and WDAs. I thought we could have done a better job of reaching our membership, obviously a large group of the audience. I've been around these processes enough to know how hard it is to get participation, but this is a pretty big turning point in our work to base our direction on 69 Northwest respondents, especially if, say, 15 of those come out of this group. I mean, that's, we're putting a lot of weight on not a lot of engagement. We may have been preaching to the choir in some sense.
I think one interesting other metric that I thought was interesting is that in terms of survey completion, which this was a really long survey. It was a lot of information, a lot more than, you know, is recommended if you're doing a survey for people, but it's kind of hard to boil it down. We did have, I think, like a 98% completion rate versus the Northeast had a bigger response rate, but it wasn't as high of a completion rate. So I thought that was interesting. Like the people that took the survey definitely, you know, spent the time. So that's good. And then I'll just say, and probably Barry was going to say this too, you know, this isn't our only point of input for moving forward with the decision. It's a really important one. And I think it's giving us a lot to chew on for sure. But it's, you know, it won't be the only basis for information. And part of, you know, today is presenting another set of information about economic values and kind of jobs mix and, you know, value created and what that means. And then, you know, the next September we'll be thinking about some of the transportation inputs. And so those are all going to kind of feed into this decision-making process and these different touch points for you to respond back with to the information we're presenting. So
yeah, I definitely would just echo what Kate says, that this is one bit of information that will be input into the process. That survey is a component of information. What we hear from you in this meeting and the next meeting is going to be a component of information. Staff's going to have to digest this stuff and look at the, you know, internally as well, and we'll collectively come up with what we think is a, you know, a proposal, and then we'll be sharing that with you as we go through the process, and then ultimately goes out to the public, and we'll have another bite at the apple with them too. So yeah. Other comments or questions before we move on to Tyler's presentation? I want to make sure that if anybody had, yeah, Mike.
I'll save some detail for later when we're each sharing. But I guess a couple of questions. Given the responses, is anyone going to look at the phrasing of the questions that were encouraging one response over another, like the one you mentioned with housing, that there was only one available for housing? All right, so there's going to be a bias for if they're just answering the question, well, this one has housing, the others don't, so I'm going to pick that one, right? So there can be some bias just in the phrasing of the questions that will give a disproportionate response in different categories. And I noticed that when I was taking it, and I talked to some other people that they noticed that as well. So given that, is any of, and this is just one survey, but is any effort going to be taken to looking at the language and modifying? And then going forward, is can the questions be vetted a little bit more? I think you could get some good feedback from the people in this group that hopefully you would have a stronger instrument that would be getting better data from. So I think, because if you have a flawed document or a flawed survey, right, you're going to get flawed data. So then how can you rely on it? So that's kind of my take on this whole thing.
Well, I would, oh, no, I'm still unmuted. You know, we do feel like qualitative feedback is important. It's not, you know, it's not a census survey. It's not, what is the word I'm looking for? A scientific survey. I think I would be worried about going back and changing the language of the questions if we continue to have it open, because then the responses would be responding to different questions. And I will push back that having housing, you know, mixed use in the housing isn't so much bias as it's just the fact of what we're allowed to do with that piece of zoning. I mean, one zoning allows this and one zoning doesn't. And so, I mean, that's the same thing for, you know, jobs, like housing doesn't create jobs. So it's, you know, different uses create different outcomes. And I don't know if that's, so stating, so having scenarios that, you know, produce different things, I don't know is necessarily a bias. I think it's what we have in the code. I think, yes, you know, I know we shared our initial ideas for the survey in the last PWG meeting and asked for some feedback, but probably, you know, didn't have enough time for people to weigh in, or maybe it needs to go out multiple times. But I think we're definitely open to, if we do another round of surveys, which we probably will, because we'll need to do more open houses as we move forward with the transportation work and other work, then yes, we can absolutely are open to getting feedback on survey questions that we put together and kind of how we present that information. So
I think our goal would be to engage you guys more thoroughly in the next one we do. I think we're going to put this one to bed for right now, because we recognize that there's some questions that might have been construed one way or another, or might lead you, and that's always an issue with when you're doing these surveys. So, but yes, point well taken. Jen has her hand up too. So.
Yeah, hi. So I am just curious, you know, we have provided feedback, actually. I remember specifically us discussing how leading some of the names of these concepts were, and we didn't see that feedback actually consumed and influence the surveys at all. And so now here we are looking at an overwhelming you know, percentage of people advocating for the concept that said a complete community versus the others. So I guess I kind of go back to Steve Pinger's question that he posted in our Slack channel of what is the possible influence that any of us can have on this project? Because you say that you want our feedback, but we don't really get to see what happens with that feedback, because we have given feedback so far and it just doesn't seem to be sticking. So I would love to think that our opinions are valuable, but I really haven't seen that in our process yet.
Yeah, and I could be wrong, so I should double check this before responding, but I believe we did change the name of the scenarios in response to your feedback, which was great. They weren't called a complete community, and that
they were. It was
employer
literally in the survey. It said a complete community. It was in the concepts. The concepts did reflect that. I have the
we can easily
the download.
Okay, well we should check. So if they are, that was I remember telling us changing them on the document, so it might have been old ones got in there, in which case then that's a huge oversight, and I apologize, because I know we had this discussion about changing them, and I know we changed them in several of our materials to just be, because I think you were right, to just say employment, mixed use, industrial.
That was our intent, so that
so if
an oversight on our part. We did try to incorporate another bit of feedback we heard from you last time was about the maps and having a more contextual base map for people to kind of orient themselves in the district. And I think that may have come from Dalton or some other folks. And we did try to integrate those kind of comments and try to improve the quality of those visuals so that people could kind of get a sense of where they were at by adding. So the naming, we'll have to go back and double check that, but we will avoid those naming conventions if we go back and continue with these scenarios. We do want to just keep it at enhanced industrial employment and mixed use without any further, embellishment on that. That's our goal.
And I've always had a problem too with, just the term enhanced industrial. Maybe I haven't said that enough, but that implies to me that you're improving our situation in the industrial area when none of that is actually happening with the reduction of industrial land from even the first option available, and not mentioning anything about an option around no streetcar in the area.
Yeah. No change kind of.
And then the survey definitely didn't have anything. Well, to be honest, I didn't take the survey. I went through the survey, but I didn't actually fill out the survey because of that. I didn't have anything in my options that I support from the industrial side of Northwest area.
Okay. We're going to talk about this when we go around the room. We're getting a little bit of that now. I mean, I guess no change is always an option in this. So maintaining the status quo is an option. So it's probably not a good option for a transit investment, but that's something we can talk about as well.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, the idea here is what kind of impact will a streetcar have, and what the different advancements or enhancements to that streetcar, the property for that streetcar. But yeah, it's never been highlighted that do nothing is an option, and
yeah,
maybe
that emphasize that.
So, thanks.
Other comments before we go on to Tyler's presentation and learn a little bit about what their analysis shows? Okay, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler. Tyler, do you want me to bring up the slides and you'll just tell me when to change them?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Barry, while you do that, I'll just maybe give a quick intro. Barry had mentioned that some of these findings that we're going to share with you today are absolutely, as he called it, hot off the press. And we wanted to make sure to get these in front of you so that you have enough information, even as we're refining our analysis, to start thinking about where your thoughts are to inform the process and inform the recommendations in this preferred scenario. And so that being said, these are very preliminary and draft results that will change and are likely to change. The important thing to look here, and when I show these results, is the relationship of the scenarios to each other and the scale, not necessarily the exact numbers that you might see on here. So I'll walk through what that means when we see the charts, but I do want to keep in mind that, want to make sure that you all keep in mind that these are draft and preliminary. We're going to continue to make refinements and improvements to our work, but the relationship and the scale of the results to each other is the thing to pay attention to right now as we evaluate the scenarios. Barry, do you have any additional comments on that?
No, the only thing I would say is that, again, these are emphasizing that they're preliminary, and we hope we'll definitely be doing more work on these. The purpose of working through a lot of this is to understand what the impacts and the implications of these zone changes are on jobs and housing, but also importantly, because we're really trying to focus on, what this means in terms of the kind of an equity, with an equity lens, what value is generated through different land use scenarios, and how can we think about potentially corralling some of that value and applying it in a way that provides public benefits, whether we talked about this before, affordable housing or affordable commercial space or brownfield remediation or whatever. And the nut of this will be to try to figure out, do those benefits outweigh the other trade-offs, which include, loss of high-paying industrial jobs or anything like that. So that's the purpose of a lot of this analysis. I just say that, and we'll have more information as we move through it.
Yeah, thanks, Barry. I do also want to highlight this trade-offs piece. And so our role here is in evaluating the impacts of the different scenarios and the potential to look at a baseline do-nothing scenario, really, of existing policies, community benefits and transit ridership and sort of mode split and how that impacts transit investments and transportation investments. So this is all sort of just, fact finding and information gathering to help inform ultimately the decision, which is where do you want to go and what are the key outcomes that you want to make that decision. Next slide, Barry. So I want to talk about how we did what we did and what our approach is before I get into the results. We're solving for, and this is following up on my previous presentation from July, June, COVID time work. We went through what is residual land value, how do we look at development feasibility, and then we looked at some prototypical development types that might fit in each scenario to show how those compare to each other. So we're taking that approach to this work and sort of marrying that up with the land use and public realm concepts that Perkins and Will has presented, and that's informing these scenarios, and evaluating what we call market capacity, market supportive capacity from those. And I want to be clear that this isn't a forecast. This is how the market would respond from a development perspective to different land use alternatives and what kind of development types would fit within those. And then when we do that, we're comparing the results in terms of number of jobs across the different scenarios, different types of jobs, number of housing units, affordable housing units under inclusionary, and then ultimately to help inform this community benefits conversation, the potential value and increment that's generated in land value, this residual land value from the different land use choices. So that's the general framework for how we're looking at these things. Next slide, Barry. So I want to talk about the steps about how we get here. So we have a baseline scenario, and we are plugging in existing development allowances for every single existing base zone that exists. So this top slide is a fairly ugly map of our existing base zone in Northwest and of the study area. And so when we look at in terms of development prototypes, we're actually applying 65 development prototypes that we're looking at here as part of this project on every single parcel in the study area, and the study area being a 1/4 mile buffer of the potential alignment. So it's a big area. We're looking at a lot of different development types, but we're evaluating those at the parcel level and then aggregating back up to say, what is the cumulative impact of parcel level developability under these different land use scenarios. So we take this baseline analysis and then we look at the different land use and urban form scenarios that I mentioned, Perkins and Will's work. This one right here is the employment scenario on the bottom. But we're taking all 3 of the different scenarios and plugging in different development prototypes and essentially different zoning designations really that would be allowed under these different land use scenarios. Next slide, Barry.
Whoops, sorry.
And so what this ultimately looks like, and this is actually a screenshot of our pro forma web-based tool, parcel level pro forma web-based tool that we're evaluating all these in, is we get a highest and best use for each parcel under each land use scenario that has a zoning designation corresponding with it. And that gets us to these total cumulative outcomes across the whole study area. We have made a couple decisions just in terms of understanding the scale of change and the impact of the decisions to include or exclude some areas as part of our sensitivity testing that we're doing. And so we're really trying to dig in on the impact of 2 things here. One is land use changes, and the other is potential impacts on revenues and developability from new transit. So we know that streetcar has a transit premium for rents and sale prices when you're adjacent to streetcar. So what happens when you introduce transit, and how does that impact development feasibility? So 2 different things happening here. Next slide, please, Barry.
Okay.
So in over sort of preliminary findings overall, all scenarios, the 3 scenarios that we're looking at, the enhanced industrial, employment, mixed use scenarios, they all provide development outcomes that are beyond the baseline allowances. And when I'm talking about these things, based on the last conversations that we had, I want to be very clear that in our analysis, we're not putting any value on the outcomes. I think we're showing you the criteria by which we've heard from you all and from PBOT and BPS about how they want to think about things and the information they need to make decisions. But these are just straight outcomes, no value associated with them from our end, qualitative value from our end. The enhanced industrial scenario provides moderate increases in new jobs, square feet, and increment in residual land value across the whole study area. The employment and mixed use scenarios provide the greatest increase in new jobs, housing, square feet, and increment and value generated. And that really is a function of density and development allowances. When we get to the summary results here, you can see the relationship between employment and mixed use, which is a little bit different than the feedback from the survey that we just saw. So it's interesting to see the perceptions of value created from different scenarios relative to the outcomes that we're showing here. And then the other thing is there are trade-offs associated with all of these scenarios. We have existing policies on industrial land capacity, industrial land preservation. We have existing policies on employment density. We have existing policies across the city for housing production and affordable housing. And those are in conflict sometimes. And so when we see these scenarios and the results, it's really about the trade-offs associated with the outcomes of each scenario. Barry, next slide, please. All right, and this is where things get interesting. So this first slide shows what we're calling the net job and housing changes or differences between each of the scenarios. And so the red bars are the number of new jobs created under each scenario. And the blue bars are the number of new housing units created, total housing units created under each scenario. So this is fairly intuitive if you think back to what goes into those land use scenarios that we're evaluating. A little bit more allowances for employment uses in the enhanced industrial scenario. So you see a little bit of increase in jobs there. That 1,200 unit net housing changes is really about what we're looking at in terms of, and Barry, correct me if I'm using the wrong term here, but cleaning up the edges along some of the existing IG zone properties along 405 and Highway 30. So there's a little bit of housing there, but it's really on the edges that are areas that are currently zoned IG or comp planned for mixed use. So a little bit of difference there, nuance there. And then really the big jump is when you get to this employment scenario in sort of total activity being both jobs and housing, where we see a lot more starting to happen on number of jobs in the employment scenario versus the industrial scenario. And before I get a little bit further in the employment mixed use, I think it's worthwhile to note that there are a handful of large parcels in the study area that really impact the total results here. So ESCO is a big deal. And how we treat ESCO and how we analyze ESCO and other large sites throughout the study area impact the results that we're seeing here in disproportionate ways compared to the whole district and parcels throughout the district. And so in this enhanced industrial scenario to an employment scenario, in the enhanced industrial, we're looking at a EG type zoning. So a general employment type zoning, that's a 3-to-1 FAR. In the employment scenario, that shifts to a much more intense EX, no housing scale of development, which is essentially a 5/2 7-story office building, podium construction office building. So that level of change from EG to EX, no housing on one parcel has big impacts, and on other parcels has moderate impacts. And then we get to the mixed use scenario, and that's where you really start to see this housing taking off. And this is where you have broader housing allowances on a lot of those larger sites that are currently zoned industrial throughout the area. And also when you start to see a reduction in total jobs. And this is a really interesting one for us to dig into when we look at the type of jobs in the next couple of slides here. So next slide, please, Barry. The thing that I want to talk about here is this gross square feet increment. And so this is what's driving our job breakdown. So I just wanted to share this about the total square feet of market supportive development capacity in each of these different scenarios for office, for industrial, and for retail uses. And this is aligned with the same findings, the same things that we talked about as a group with you all in June around the challenges of development feasibility in this one for industrial development in Northwest, given construction costs, industrial revenues, rents, and land values. So that's the challenging thing right here in the enhanced industrial. It's really a market barrier for industrial development in this scenario, not necessarily a regulatory barrier. But you start to see this office pop up here as part of that industrial office or creative office thing that you all have been talking about as part of the scenario. And this, when you get to the employment scenario, is when you start to see much more of a traditional sort of office, higher density office function. Again, in this sort of 5/2 podium construction building. And then in the mixed use scenario, this is where you see the redevelopment starting to occur of existing industrial uses, where the highest and best use then becomes a mixed use or residential development building. So next slide, please, Barry. And this is the change in jobs. And so this is how we get to jobs from square feet and that change in square feet. And in this sort of brown, rusty color is industrial jobs and industrial changes by those scenarios. The gray is office employment changes by each of those scenarios. And the sort of mustardy color is retail and restaurants. And again, this is aligned with the development types that we're looking at. And when you get to the mixed use scenario, you see a bigger bump in retail and restaurants because we have more ground floor commercial uses that are occurring in those. One thing that I do want to note here, and this is actually really good following up on that survey results, is that we didn't look at any ground floor commercial requirements in the mixed use zones. And so if we were to put in a ground floor commercial requirement that's adjacent to the streetcar alignment, that would change two things, actually. It would change both the amount of retail and restaurant jobs here, and it would also decrease the amount of housing units because that gross square feet is then going from residential to ground floor commercial. So one of the other things that we'll be working with the team on is to really dig into this sort of ground floor commercial thinking around adjacency to the streetcar alignment. And there's a chat here, so I'm going to pause and make sure. Okay. The next slide here is on residential unit changes, and this is shows the different results in total market rate units and affordable units across each of these scenarios. And so we're looking at what is the current, back one slide there.
Sorry about that.
For the affordable units, what is the current requirements for inclusionary zoning? And those requirements that we're modeling are 8% of units at 60% MFI and 15% of units at 80% MFI. And so this represents, back one. Well, there we go. This represents those inclusion rates and affordability targets for the inclusionary zoning program. The other thing to note here is, as part of the market rate units, not everything is in large scale multifamily buildings. And so we do start to see the sort of transit premium or the result of the streetcar investment starting to make other more medium scale and sort of lower density multifamily start to happen in different parts of Northwest, where we start to see more townhouse development, sort of lower density multifamily stuff that doesn't hit the threshold for requiring inclusionary zoning, which is in 20 units or more in a building. So there's a lot of stuff that's happening in this affordability market rate side here, but definitely the biggest thing here is the total amount of residential units in the employment scenario versus the total amount of residential units in the mixed use scenario. And then next slide. All right, so the next slide, and Barry and I can walk through this together. I didn't want to put any numbers on here because we're not quite there yet to put numbers in and have those out and sort of talk about those in terms of total development value. But this is what we're seeing as the relationship between the outcomes of total residual land value that's created from the land use changes and the transit investment by each of these scenarios compared to the baseline. So this is one where I did put the baseline in here. And so this essentially is a market capacity of development under existing zoning and the impacts on total land value, essentially the value capture component of this in land value, and then how that compares to each of these scenarios too. And so in this industrial scenario, it's about 10% higher in the enhanced industrial scenario than the baseline scenario. In the employment scenario, the total land values in aggregate for the area are about 58% higher than the baseline scenario. And then for mixed use, it goes up to 1.74. And this is an important sort of concept, and the relationship and scale of these are likely to be pretty similar when we get to final results. And so this is important when we think about the community benefits and how to fund sort of equitable development and community benefits, and how do you make those trade-offs and policy decisions for other policy goals that the city has. And so there's a lot to unpack in this chart, and we're going to be digging into this more and sharing more refined results with you once we spend a lot more time with the project team on our analysis results, but wanted to at least provide this level of overview on total increment between the different scenarios. Barry, that's it. Next slide.
I'm gonna break for some questions here, and I want to make sure that we have time to go around the room and get people's thoughts too. So, what maybe 5 minutes on questions, or what comes to mind, or questions that you all might have about this data so far? Is there stuff in the chat, Mike? It was off for me.
Yeah, Phil's got a couple questions in the chat. Phil, do you want to just ask them directly?
Yeah.
Well, one probably obvious question I would think is, can we get to a point of identifying how well housing types can be matched to job types? If we're creating entry-level jobs, we might need to provide, say, affordable housing, but the objective should be to have not entirely self-sufficient, that's the wrong term, but a community that minimizes external trips, and streetcar can only carry so many of those trips.
That's a great question, and we do have a task of work in this community benefits piece where we'll be sort of helping an advisory roll out with BPS and Prosper. And I think that there is something we could do to answer that question. And really it gets down to the type of jobs that are being created by whatever preferred scenario whatever we land on the preferred scenario. Because we know that retail and restaurant jobs have a certain wage. We know that market rate housing prices are, X amount per square foot for a 550 square foot studio and X amount per square foot for an 850 square foot 2-bedroom. And so we can sort of do a matchup or a mismatched analysis really of how those are aligned to target some affordability for the jobs that could be created here to better match those up in the income levels and the subsidy and part of the increment generated to be able to offset some of that. So I think we could get there with the information that we have so far.
Thank you.
Other folks with questions or comments? I see one. Steve, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
I do. Tyler, are you talking about some sort of public capture of the development value change then?
Yeah, I think what we're testing out to do is to look at not the mechanism by which value could be captured, but the scale of the value that could be captured from land use changes and transit investment.
All right, well, that was my question then, is what's the vehicle for that? What's the instrument? So, but not part of your scope.
And I can tell you, Steve, we don't know the answer to that yet. We don't have a thing like an urban renewal area here, and it's not a place that would necessarily be a candidate for that. Right. I think in today's environment, although, who knows?
But I assume this study does address that.
Well, we're at least trying to get down the road on that, to figure out how you might, what kind of a mechanism would work, but I don't have any answers on that yet.
Yeah, understood. Okay, thanks.
Mike, was that a question on did I see you with a hand up, or did I misinterpret that?
That was just me saying hi to my wife.
Oh, okay.
Phil, you had another question in here, which I think is an important one for the sort of equity context and framing of the policy decisions, which is development value benefit accrues to whom and private interest or the community. And so when we look at residual land value, that increment, that's to the existing property owner. And so in the context of an equitable development strategy, we're trying to figure out what scale of value can you capture to fund community benefits. There still needs to be some increment there to incent the creation of the thing that you're doing to try to generate community benefit. But really the whole concept of value capture is to capture the value that would be generated by existing property owners and landowners into a community benefit. Thanks,
Tyler. That's similar to what Steve was asking too, I think.
And it's a layered thing. I think speaking for Tyler, right? There's some benefit capture, but it would have to. There's certain things that there's incentive to actually do something with it. There's paying for infrastructure. There's paying for the cost of any enhancement to affordability, and then anything above and beyond that, you'd have to be looking at. So it's a layered kind of thing. We're not there yet, but that would be part of what we're trying to figure out.
And the other thing is that different property owners and different properties see value and benefit differently, and it's disproportionate. So you may have a large property owner that has a low land basis. They acquired their land a long time ago, and they're going to see a land use change. The value to that property owner is greater than somebody else that may not see as much of a change in entitlement. And so what we're looking at is, again, this aggregate impact of value, not on the property specifically. So, that's part of the conversation I know that Dan's had with folks in the past on streetcar funding, and that you all have had as part of being organized with PSI over the years. It's conversations that folks had with special districts like the Enhanced Services District in the Central East Side when they went through that a couple of years ago, of like, what is the value, what is the benefit, and who benefits mostly as part of that. It's not even.
So I think we're getting close on time, and I want to make sure I have time to hear from everybody here. So I didn't see a lot of hands going up for questions, so we can either do some stuff on Slack if you want, or you can send questions directly to us, and we can try to respond to them via email, and include the group on those things. So I want to go ahead and move on to the next agenda item, which is just to test, see where you guys are at with, you had 3 different scenarios out there. We asked the public and we asked you all your opinions about them. I kind of want to remind folks of what I sent out some questions earlier, but I'll just pop them back up. I want to go around the room and just see, what your thoughts were about the different scenarios that were presented, and maybe even in light of what we just heard about value creation, and what resources or what other information you would need to help inform kind of the next step in the conversation about these things. And if you have any, initial inkling of direction on what you think makes sense, and you don't have to commit to anything today on that, but if you did, what are kind of, things that you'd want to see in whatever direction we move in. So if folks are up for that, I'm going to go ahead and go around the list if I can. Maybe I can,
Barry, this is Dan. Maybe save 1,000 questions and maybe better articulate how these land use scenarios are going to be built into a traffic model and traffic projections. Because if I was one of these people, I would say, well, I need to know traffic as well. And that's part of the plan. I think we should just be clear about that.
I mean,
Phil agrees.
Yeah, and we said earlier on that we were going to bring additional information to the September meeting. Our goal is to bring you some traffic analysis to that September meeting, but there's some challenges in getting that information together and syncing it up with the different models that we run at the City of Portland, and the timing needed to pull those together. And I'm kind of looking at Tyler's image here because we're working together on, he's got the data about the jobs and housing and how we translate it into a transportation model that makes some sense is one of the points of challenge that we're working on. Is that correct, Tyler? Yeah. Yeah. Because we typically run our model through the buildable, as I understand it, through a buildable land inventory model, which kind of makes assumptions about where development is going to happen citywide. And we don't want to give a false reading about how many trips are generated based on some raw numbers that Tyler is calculating before they're assigned to the whole network of how the city develops over time. Because we have I guess the way to think of it is we have a pie and we're adding some capacity in one part of the pie, but it probably draws from other parts of the pie. So other places in town would potentially not see development that might be reassigned here. So we need to kind of figure out how that smooshes over the landscape. Yeah, Phil.
I'm sorry to keep having so many comments, but the one thing I would like to see is a little broader context. There's a lot happening around the edges of our study area, south of Vaughan, down by the river, west of Montgomery Park. There's a lot of new development, and I'm just concerned that whoever gets there first is going to gobble up all the transportation capacity. And so I think any analysis we do, I realize you have a limited scope, but our analysis needs to fold in some of these other things. The Conway master plan area is still building out, and I don't want to leave that out.
Okay. So Are folks amenable to sharing their thoughts about the scenarios and other comments as we go around? Everybody okay with that? So let me pop up these questions for you again. And just a reminder of what we were going to ask. What are your thoughts about the different scenarios and the level of benefit? What information or resources do you think might be needed to inform preferred vision? And if you have any thoughts about a direction you might go in based on what you've got now, and no commitment necessary to any of this stuff. So I'm just going to ask folks if they want to respond to that in alphabetical order again. So Brian, you're lucky. You're at the top of my list.
All right. Nice to have a name with an A at the start. Yeah. So, I think all the scenarios have kind of their pluses and minuses, I think, and maybe somebody on the call can help me, but understanding kind of the details of what actual zoning and FAR implications are for each of the scenarios. I think that was the thing that I wasn't able to, definitively, I'd say, understand.
Mm-hmm.
I'd want to understand that before I'd say declaring a firm preference.
Okay.
But, more I looked into it, for the, speaking for the ESCO group, or the ESCO, formerly ESCO property, I think there was references to a corporate campus on one of the scenarios. I thought that would be, kind of a neat idea. It kind of plays into the unique characteristics of the property, being that it's a big contiguous piece of property, where you might not necessarily have that type of opportunity in other places throughout the city. But then you've got the offices and how we think about the way people will office in the future might be changing. So it could be an opportunity to risk there. I saw REI's selling their headquarters in Bellevue before they've even occupied the building. So the idea of a large concentration of people in a sort of headquarters type of setting, may look different. Of course, understand that housing may be, is obviously very important in the city. You saw, I think that was reflected in some of the survey results that we saw. But, I think that's the benefit of being part of this forum, is we have a chance to kind of see what people are thinking. And that, that to me it will better inform, what the direction is at the ESCO site, is to really see what comes out of this. I think that's about it. So, maybe offline I could talk to Tyler, somebody that would understand what this actual zoning was for each of the scenarios. But
and I could, we could certainly give folks more information about that kind of stuff. They're just placeholders right now. So maybe I'll follow up on that topic, and we can go from there. Yeah, because I don't think any of them were wedded to yet. They were just placeholder kind of zoning applications.
Right.
We did think about them.
Yeah.
Okay. Stephanie, do you want to weigh in on anything, or do you have any thoughts on the scenarios or anything, or is...
Sure. I don't have a preference. I don't have a favored one right now. I am usually a big fan of mixed use. However, the one thing that I always am concerned about is if you aren't creating jobs that are helping to really create a community, and you're just putting affordable housing in there, you're not fixing some of the problems that we already have with some of the areas of Portland where you've got people having to leave to go, work their job and then come back. It sounds like the results of the survey, you kind of had a large percentage of very similar people answering. I kind of would like to get some input from the what the groups are doing, to see kind of what some of those comments are. Okay. Because I feel like I would really like to get some of that input. Right now I'm actually kind of leaning toward number 2, which is the employment. But the other thing too is if you're creating a lot of employment and you don't have enough housing there, you do have to worry about getting people in the area. And as much as you have streetcar is great, but a lot of people are still going to drive. And if you already have people concerned about traffic issues in that area, you know, you're not going to get buy-in from them. So, but I would also like to see a little bit more about the job types that there's a potential for. And then also, I just would like more diversity in the people who are weighing in on their opinions about these choices.
Okay. Great. Raymond, I have you up next.
Yeah, I lean towards the mixed use, but I'd like to see a lot more detail as to what that really means and what kind of housing are we talking about? Is it affordable, or who will be able to live in this area? And I do agree with Stephanie, you know, we need to look at the jobs. If it'd be great if we could have employment, but also housing in the same area so people don't have to be jumping in their cars. And I guess being a bit of a history buff and looking back at the history of streetcars in Portland back at the turn of the last century, how did they get developed? They actually got developed by developers funding them all and actually owning the streetcars. And I hope we don't get into a scenario that we're getting money for the streetcar just from people who want to develop this area and for their own benefit and not other people's.
All right. Thank you for your thoughts on that. It sounds like jobs housing balance is going to maybe rise more of a concern.
Right.
So Reza, what do you think? What you're up on my list next? We still with it? Okay.
So thanks, Barry, and all for the presentations. I think I sort of echo what Phil has been saying all along. We need more information about traffic and transportation to really have an informed opinion about this. I personally lean towards a mixed use, but I'm also worried about impacts to the transportation system on neighborhood greenways in Northwest. I don't want to see overflow traffic on those streets, making it worse for people walking and biking in the neighborhood. And quite honestly, I'm not sure about streetcar and whether it'd be able to handle enough of the load to get people to and from the district for people who don't live there. Streetcar integrates poorly with the rest of the transit network in the city. It doesn't really connect well with the transit mall or the MAX at this point. So, you know, connections, streetcar is great, but streetcar doesn't only serve as a subset of the city, and to try to connect to it from the rest of the city, let alone the region, it's a little difficult right now. So yeah, I'm cautiously optimistic about the scenarios proposed, but I would need to see a lot more information before having an opinion about it.
Okay. Hopefully we'll have some more info next time. Craig, I have you up next on our list.
Craig had to drop off.
Craig had to drop off? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I will move on then, and we'll get his feedback next time. Dalton, you're next on my list.
Yeah, it's hard not to echo what a lot of people are saying. I mean, it's a very complicated process. So many factors. Yeah. It would be kind of interesting. Tyler had, I really love seeing statistics. I really love seeing the numbers. It's making things real. It'd be interesting to see, but so many of his numbers were very extreme. It'd be very interesting to see, you know, if there was a hybrid, you know, what would kind of just statistically, what would the ideal scenario be? Mm-hmm. Right, what would that balance be? And then kind of get into, you really have to go block by block on this, don't you? Because there's some empty lots, there's some properties, as I think last time Jordan Winkler mentioned, he owns most of the super block, and that's not going anywhere, and that's a big factor there. You know, certain properties, do they have the potential to shift to be something else in the short term, or is that not realistic? Is that maybe long term? So it's hard to say, and there's so many factors. I think transportation wise. So my experience, obviously, I live in the area. Having the freight access right in front of the housing has never been ideal. You know, maybe if that's coming from the north, if from Nikolai, that's just my suggestion. And then also, what is the transportation wise? How are people going to be able to walk to and from? I think that's a huge problem with me and my family already. I have 2 little girls, and it doesn't feel safe walking under the underpass. A lot of sketchiness there. And then the new traffic lights at 23rd and Vaughn are helpful, but you basically have to run across. And if we're talking, there's going to be hundreds of people added to this area. How are they going to get across? Do we need to start looking at something like a pedestrian bike bridge, maybe around, 22nd, 21st, how's this area going to connect? So it's hard to give more input than that right now, but I'm always going to advocate for housing. Maybe it's only up till Roosevelt. Maybe it's pulled back, but a little more connection of all the different pieces.
Great, thank you. Kashay, did you want to weigh in, or do you have an opinion or thoughts about this at this point in time? Do we lose Kashay? Maybe.
Can you? I forgot that I was muted.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm gonna have to echo everybody else's statement on that. I'm gonna need a little bit more information. Truth be told, I am kind of a novice when it comes to situations like these, but just based off of what I've heard, just from interacting with clients and their concerns, I think the biggest thing, of course, is jobs, housing, and safety. Needless to say, I know that there's a pretty high concentration houseless folk around the area. What's going to happen with them?
Oh, we're losing you.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, just kind of being able to keep track of those who may inevitably fall to the wayside, because that's usually what happens when there's some big development going on and things change. So my biggest concern, of course, would always be, what's going to happen with the quote unquote little people. Like, where are they going to have housing? Are they going to have access to jobs? Or is it going to, so it's supposed to, in essence, kind of create that situation, but there have been too many instances historically here in the city of Portland of development happening and then people not really reaping the benefits of it.
Okay. Thank you. Jen, I have you next up on the list. Thoughts and feedback for us.
Yeah, thoughts on the different scenarios presented. I think that their presentation alone is problematic. I think that what I'm hearing a lot of, and that I share the feelings around, is how the complexity of information, specifically that it is not clearly communicated the consequences of each of these scenarios. Additionally, we have been provided a rather ambitious list of reading material and contextual information that I have reviewed, and yet it is not clearly communicated in any of the concepts that have been presented. So I'm curious what the relationship is between all of these studies that you've had us consume and what we're supposed to be seeing, because currently there is a big disconnect, and I think that's why there's so much trepidation around any level of confidence for one scenario over the other. I think it's hard to compare them because they're not set up in a way to actually compare them. And so that that's really the foundational thoughts that I have around the scenarios, because I don't really think that they've been set up to inform the general public, let alone this group of people, on what the realistic consequences are. So what information or resources do I think need to help inform a preferred scenario? I think speaking to the contextual information that you've advised us to consume would be a good start. I think the racial equity analysis has not really been addressed in any of the concepts. I think that there are other environmental factors that have been outlined by all of the EPA links that you have linked us to as well, have not been addressed. So I'm just not, it's not entirely clear what real feedback you want from us. Are we really providing you feedback, or are we helping development check boxes for rezoning and regulations around this area? It makes me wonder, as a volunteer who is not being paid to be a part of this group, what is my real value here? And as far as a preferred direction, because of the lack of clear context around each of these scenarios, I'd say that all of them are highly problematic, and I would elect for none of them. If there is more clear, concise, contextual information provided to help us make an informed decision, I would gladly reconsider that. But right now, none of these would, I don't think any of them are suitable. And I think we had a really great opportunity to engage the public, and it was a great swing and a miss. I am optimistic of changing that opinion as I learn more, but currently that's where it stands.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just specifically on the racial equity analysis, I know that came up on the Slack discussion board. So I think that might be worth having a conversation about, and maybe we can kind of flesh that out. I mean, part of the, I just want to embellish or talk, just respond to that, just because part of the work that Tyler's doing to try to figure out this value capture is really trying to get at that, because we know that a lot of industrial employees and employment jobs tend to be available to communities that we're concerned about making sure that we're not leaving by the wayside. I think it's Cachet was talking about maybe. And so part of that whole part of that analysis is trying to get at that, but I agree, we can try to make it clearer and try to draw those connections more clearly. So that's, I'm glad to hear that charge set out for us. So we'll try to follow up on this.
Yeah, and I know, honestly, I know it's not an easy thing at all. And I question, especially with that preliminary equity analysis, if the actual demographics of the industrial area match what was presented in that analysis. Additionally, I think moving forward, what would be helpful, because what we're looking at is wall of text, and the general public has less affinity of reviewing that kind of information and digesting it successfully, is perhaps collecting some videos of the perspectives of the different type of communities and people that are being impacted, like hearing from someone who works in manufacturing, hearing from someone who works in retail, hearing from the transit, someone who wants to speak on behalf of transit. Phil, I know would be a great fit for that. But so getting to actually hear the perspectives that are going to be impacted rather than reading these walls of text, I think could help provide more traction in terms of understanding what the real impacts are here.
Let's follow up on this one as well. I have some additional thoughts, but I want to let everybody have a chance to weigh in today. So let's follow up directly on that. Greg, are you still with us? I wanted to hear from you and get your perspectives.
I thought he signed off.
Yeah, I think Greg had to sign off.
Okay. Joy, do you have anything you want to offer at this point in time, or thoughts on the scenarios or information needed?
Yes, I realize that we're almost out of time, so I guess I'll just say I echo a lot of the things that were mentioned. Jen, speaking to marrying the studies and the information with the scenarios presented, I think is really important. And I think it's going to help help some of us and the entire community hopefully make some concrete decisions that are based on a more fleshed out picture of who's really benefiting and who's really going to be hurt. Because of course it's always, you know, different for everyone. I think that if I'm being honest, I've been sitting here for the last 2 hours thinking about the houseless community, and I'm curious about representation for them. I do think this is going to be hugely impactful for them. And so I just wanted to put that out there that I'm curious if there's any chance that we could all maybe just take a minute to brainstorm about that specific community. It's a tough time to be anybody right now, but I know it's especially a tough time on the houseless community. And as far as a preferred direction, right now I'm firmly in the do nothing camp, just because of, you know, I've poured over the information that's been given to me, and I don't feel like I've necessarily been able to successfully marry, you know, all that information with these 3 scenarios. And, you know, Barry, we spoke and you had mentioned that zoning is a bit of a blunt instrument. And I feel like until we can figure out how to specifically address some of the marginalized communities, it would be a mistake to move forward with something imperfect. That being said, I really am doing my very, very, very best to approach the public in a very neutral and informative way. And I do appreciate everybody's time showing up for these, but specifically people who are doing this and volunteering their time. You know, I know it's tough for everyone to show up, and I just want to say I really do appreciate it. And I'm glad that it seems like maybe we're getting a little bit clearer path of how we can, you know, offer some feedback and see some change come out of it. So.
Well, we've got some work to do on that. Steve, I have you up next on the list. And I want to ask folks if they could just stick around 10 more minutes or so if your name hasn't been called yet, so we can hear your thoughts on this. So Steve Pinger. Did we lose Steve?
Yeah, 10 minutes is fine, Barry. The Northwest District Association circulated a list of 20-odd comments that I think everybody has seen. It's
and I should
posted.
Acknowledge that I have seen them and I have them as well. So.
Okay, it's posted on Slack, but to respond to your feedback questions here a little more directly, I just feel like we're dealing with some really kind of vexed scenarios or star-crossed scenarios. And by that, I simply mean that, you know, scenario 1 to me is unlikely to be able to support streetcar. So if this is a streetcar-based study, then scenario 1 is kind of infeasible, I would say. Scenario 2 gets pretty interesting just because, you know, I think, you know, facing profound changes in public habits and particularly working and employment habits. I don't think anybody knows what it's going to be like to go to work or in, you know, over the current, you know, in the planning horizon that we're dealing with here. So having a scenario that's based heavily on office use seems uncertain. And the third scenario, the mixed use scenario, just seems to be in such great conflict with the stated equity objectives that are surrounding this study that, you know, it too seems like it's self-disqualifying. So I don't know. I mean, I guess aside from that, all the scenarios have disqualified themselves, I, you know, could come to some sort of preference, but I would also just want to note, you know, that there is certainly been discussion of scenario 0, which is to do nothing. And I think there's some support for that. But I would also want to forward scenario 4, which is to do something else. And I think that's one that I really think we need to put our shoulder into, because I think the potential of this area to serve the future of the city, I think, is phenomenal. But I think we're approaching it in these scenarios with scenarios that are dated. They're, you know, recent, but certainly not future.
Okay. Would scenario 4 be a hybrid, or is it something entirely outside of the box? I want to just understand a little bit more about what.
Well, I think it may be a part hybrid, but I think there's things we're not even touching in any of these scenarios.
Well, hopefully I'd be happy to hear some of those thoughts either on Slack or directly, you know, email, and then we can maybe touch base on some of those at the next meeting.
Right.
Good. And then I was going down the list, sorry. Phil, you're next on the list. Phil, followed by Mike, Jordan, and Alexandra. Sorry, you're at the bottom of the list. We'll go opposite direction next time.
Quickly, I would say Tyler's information presented this evening was very helpful. I'd like to see more of that. Personally, I'm very sympathetic to the enhanced industrial scenario, in that it preserves family wage jobs and the type of jobs that maybe the region certainly needs preserved and maybe more of. I agree with Steve that it's probably not supportive of streetcar. On the employment scenario, my concern there is that it turns the study area into a commute destination. Streetcar is not a commute mode for the reasons Reza stated. So I'm pretty down on scenario 2, also for the reasons Steve stated. And I could support the mixed use scenario if there was a jobs and housing matchup, and we could get a good entry-level job, affordable housing lineup in there. I don't know how you do that against the market forces. And finally, I would just point out that Montgomery Park is kind of a fait accompli. I mean, it is what it is, and we haven't really been talking about that as a constant through all these scenarios. That's it. Thanks.
Yeah, and I guess I would just echo, yeah, that Montgomery Park, I think, at least in our online information, we try to be as consistent as possible with saying that they're, you know, assuming that they're on a path of their own towards their future. But Mike, I'm going to get to ask you first.
All right. I will hope to make this quick. There's a commercial being filmed outside my house right now, and they're going to be washing a dog apparently. So I want to go check that out. So with that in mind, what Tyler was providing was a great start. Information, right? So that's my whole thing, is making an informed decision. And I just do not have the experience or information at hand to make a decision. So to answer these questions, I have no idea. You know, looking at demand questions, and this kind of goes to Steve's point, what is the demand for either housing, what type of housing, what kind of jobs, what does that look like? Again, recognizing that information is not perfectly available, but you know, this is not the first thing that's ever been created on the planet. So what are those resources that we can access to make the best information guess we can? So looking at demand for everything, how that plays into Portland overall, right? So it's not just this little micro thing, everything is interconnected. So how does that play out on the housing, jobs, a lot of what's been said, and the transportation, because that plays into everything as well. And then what is the developer interest in any of this, right? So folks have existing property, people invested to get property. What is it that they find acceptable? And again, the do nothing scenario isn't really doing nothing. There's still development going to be within existing zoning, right? So something's going to happen. So what's the appetite if there's no zone change, which is different than doing nothing, right? And then I guess from the bigger picture collectively, is this, any of this, is it a good idea, right? And I think that's what was missing from the survey is, you know, kind of this, is this needed? Is it, does it make sense? So with that, you know, thank you all for doing this work. Looking forward to continue moving down this path. And I am going to check out and go watch a commercial being made. All right.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Jordan, I still have you and Alexandra on the list if she's still with us. So.
Great, thanks. I'd like to make just a few comments, some sort of from a perspective of just a resident and a citizen of the city, and some more specific to sort of a property owner perspective.
Great.
Just big picture, this is such a close-in area, and it's so big. Just picking up on something Dan put in the comments, the scale of the redevelopment, you know, as described in Tyler Bump's study, is in the millions of square feet. And so it'll take, you know, literally decades for it to all be built out to that development capacity. So I think I think we have to think about it in that context, where this is not going to happen tomorrow. This is not going to happen in tomorrow's environment. It's really over the long term, even if we start planning for transit investments now. And so thinking about the city and the comprehensive plan and the goals over the long term, I think this has got to be, or I would prefer if it were something closer to the mixed use scenario, because it's the right sort of economic and environmental solution for a growing city. This is a huge close-in area, and it's a natural growth area for the central city to go into. And I think we should think about this as sort of tied into the fabric of the central city and the rest of the city, not as just a bubble on its own where the housing and the jobs, everyone's got to be within a few blocks of each other, because particularly if you make the transit investments, this is just another big part of the city, and we got to just view it in that context and connect it to everything else going on. On the sort of the equity and environmental concerns, I would make the argument that the mixed use approach is sort of the best equity approach. And if we don't sort of address our housing needs and housing shortages, we don't build more housing, then sort of that existing housing stock is only going to be more expensive over time as, you know, the population grows and everything else, and only sort of the economic bump from redevelopment in the upzone produces the sort of the income that can pay for, you know, an environmental site cleanup. You know, industrial sites get cleaned up usually when they transition. So without that kind of transition, we may not get those cleanups. And of course, being closer to the central city and everything else than say the suburbs, where the alternative to growth is, if we don't grow close in, the growth will be out, you know, on the periphery. A much better environmental solution with much shorter trips. You know, close-in industrial jobs is valuable. I just think the close-in housing and office is more valuable because of the more trips and the more connectedness and, you know, the higher productivity that you see in all the, you know, you see in close-in industrial, close-in sort of central city environments. Just sort of setting to a much smaller scale. I've got sort of industrial tenants who made big investments are going to be there for a long time. And I think they could coexist with the streetcar and the other transition and changes we're talking about, because it takes so long for those to come into effect. But I think it would be, you know, this is really getting down to the weeds. It would be difficult for them to bear the burden of, say, an LID or big taxes to pay for those transit investments, because they don't gain as much from it as sort of existing in place industrial users who got machinery they're operating or whatever, that they're going to be fixed for a period of time. So it just sort of, when we get to how to get to the community benefits exactions that are sort of beyond the typical IZ minimums, or just encourage you to attach those to redevelopments rather than burden existing industrial businesses.
Okay, we got a lot of working through that. We'll, if we go in that direction at all, we'll have a lot of work to do on that. And okay, and Alexandra, sorry to keep you waiting. Are you still with us?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I really want to echo what everybody else has said here today. I think we're all looking for a lot more detail, a lot of really critical conversations that need to happen about that jobs and housing mix and who exactly is that serving. Really liked Phil's idea that was echoed by others of sort of a kind of a self-contained community where folks are able to work and live in the same district. How are we going to handle those external trips if we were just kind of a commute destination up there? Also, I'm a little disappointed to see, you know, even in the mixed use scenario, how much of the housing generated is market rate. You know, we know that cost continues to skyrocket and has certainly not kept pace with jobs or inflation. So again, just thinking about how do we match up the folks that are living and working in the area, and who's that serving, and really looking to the community benefits piece, which I understand is further down the road. Also, the transportation analysis is a huge piece of it. Phil brought up a great point as well about the edges of the neighborhood and what's going on elsewhere in terms of development, and how the system is fairly close to being overloaded as it is. And Reza also brought up great points about we don't have great connectivity to the rest of the city, the rest of the region. So I think we've all kind of said the same thing, that, you know, we need to see a little bit more context, a little bit more granular approach, which is hard to do at this point in the game, right? But speaking kind of for the PSI board, we're really hesitant to make any kind of commitment to a preferred scenario right now. We're really just looking for more information and pursuing an option that is going to give the most flexibility and the most density, but that's got to be coupled in the right way. It's got to be the right kind of investment, and how do you realize that in a way that benefits everybody? And so I think until we know a little bit more of that, and know kind of what the full build out of that
we just lost you.
And who's there kind of 24 hours a day. Oh, sorry, I've kind of unstable internet lately. So yeah, I'll just say no real preference at this time. A lot more information is needed.
Okay. I think we made it through the list for sure. So thanks everybody for hanging in there. I won't keep you any longer since we're over time. I'll just say thank you all for your opinions. We've got more work that we're doing. We're going to try to bring it back. We'll try to make good on bringing you as much information as we can. And I heard comments about making sure that we check back in with you on communications, and, you know, as we start to bring stuff out to the community. So we're going to do our best to make sure that we engage you all more in that, you know, as if we're going to continue to work in a virtual world, figure out how to do that, and, you know, have that exchange and opportunity to kind of weigh in. So, so with that, anybody, public comment from anybody? I don't know, Alan was with us. Anybody that wants to comment? Any last good for the order from the PWG members? Okay. Well, why don't we call it a night, and we'll plan to talk to you all on September, I think it was 16th that I put out there, and we'll try to give you some updates and try to maybe give you some, we'll get that report to you about the public comments and try to get you any other information between now and the next meeting. So talk to you all soon. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for